Hey everyone, how's it going? I am here for yet another installment of my Sunday Miscellany videos. For those who are new to the channel or new to this particular feature on the channel, this is kind of my own take on a Friday Reads where I go through what I've read during the week, but also I go through some of the music that I've loved during the week and also the movies that I've watched during the week. And yeah, and I just chat about them as a way of giving you a reading update, but also talking about some of the other art that I have been appreciating. So I always start these out with the music, and I've listened to a lot of music this week. The past few weeks have been huge music weeks, and so that's resulted in these music sections of my Sunday Miscellanies becoming ever larger and taking up ever more of the video, which I suppose is fine. A lot of people seem to enjoy that. But anyway, I'm just listening to a lot of music, which is different from how I usually am. In the past, I have really loved the music that I liked, but I've tended to only listen to a very small, sort of small playlist of pieces that I really, really liked, and haven't been all that adventurous, haven't listened to new stuff all that much. I just listened to the same old songs and albums that I liked, but now I feel like I'm becoming a much more adventurous listener, and I'm learning how to process music better on one listen rather than needing like 5 listens to really wrap my head around something, which I think is great. You know, I think I've wanted for a long time to be a more adventurous listener and just haven't felt like I had the know-how or the means or the motivation. Now I feel like I do have at least the motivation, if not necessarily the knowledge to analyze music intelligently or anything like that. So that's really exciting, but also it means that, you know, there's a lot to talk about. So I should probably stop throat clearing at the beginning and get into the music. So you've gotten used to me talking a lot about classical music in these Sunday Miscellanies if you've watched for a few weeks, but I have quite a bit of non-classical music. I generally sort of divide my music listening. I actually have several main playlists in my Spotify that I listen to, just if I need to just turn something on, a playlist on shuffle. I have several playlists for that, and one is classical, all my favorite classical pieces, minus opera. I have a separate playlist for opera, even though they are kind of the same genre. Obviously, opera I think is a different animal. So I have classical, then I have opera, then I have jazz, which is sort of a new discovery of mine. I just started listening to the jazz at the end of last year. I'm tentatively getting more into it now. I've been listening to Miles Davis, who I'm going to mention in a minute. So I have a jazz playlist, and then I have a soundtrack playlist where it's all my favorite soundtrack music. And then I have a quote-unquote pop playlist. And pop is defined extremely broadly for me, so basically any genre of music that isn't jazz or classical is pop in this conception. I know that that's not true, so I don't mean pop in the sense of, like, you know, the music of Katy Perry or Rihanna or something, like the actual genre of pop. Just, I mean music that just isn't jazz or classical. And then I have a playlist of exclusively made up of piano music from the classical tradition and elsewhere. So those are my main playlists, and obviously there is a little bit of overlap. There are some jazz artists, like Nina Simone, for example, who do make their way into the pop soundtrack because Nina Simone's music is vocal, she sings. That feels a bit more like pop music to me, even though it has jazz, even though it's obviously jazz music. So anyway, that's how I divide my listening, and here I said I should get into the actual music, and I'm doing even more throat clearing. But anyway, to get to the actual music that I'm going to recommend today, I always leave a Spotify playlist of my recommendations in these videos, so look for that in the description. But first off, what I did this week was I re-listened to a couple of Metallica albums. I got into a conversation about Metallica with Rita from this channel Drawn to Stories, who is a new booktuber who's great, and also a longtime commenter. And that inspired me to revisit Metallica. I was sort of obsessed with Metallica in high school. Well, maybe not obsessed, but I listened to them a lot in high school. And I hadn't listened to them in years, but another thing that inspired me to revisit them is a video that I came across, and I'll try to remember to leave a link to it. And it's a video from one of my favorite music channels. It's called Inside the Score, and he did a video about metal and classical music and how well suited they are to each other, and how how close they really are in terms of what they're doing and the sort of aesthetic of them. You know, Metallica, for example, has actually performed with several symphony orchestras. So the Metallica song will be arranged for an orchestra by another composer, and it works really well. And anyway, the inside the score goes through this relationship, and it's really good. So I'll leave a link to that video. But anyway. So I listened to a couple of Metallica albums. I listened to their self-titled album and to And Justice for All, and I'll have a couple of songs from those. Moving on now to a very different genre. This is a folk singer named Sibylle Bayer, or Bayer, I'm not sure, but she is German, and she is interesting because she only has one album, and it's called Color Green. And what's interesting about this album is that the songs were actually recorded back in the 1970s, but the album wasn't released until 2006. So Sibylle Bayer kind of went under the radar for a long time, and then this album was released, and she got a lot more notoriety sort of after she had finished her singing career. This is just a magnificent album. She has a really unique voice. So anyway, there will be a couple of songs by her. I really highly recommend her if you like folk music or just general sort of singer-songwriter music. And then I have also been listening to Odetta, who is an American sort of folk blues singer. She was actually a big influence on Janis Joplin. The way that I found out about Odetta was I watched a documentary about Janis Joplin. I love Janis Joplin too. I watched a documentary about Janis Joplin, and someone mentioned that Odetta was like one of Janis Joplin's favorite singers, and so that got me interested in listening to her, and I finally started to, and I'm really glad I did. You know, I love blues music. I haven't necessarily listened to that much blues music, but I love it, and she is sort of a folk and blues singer, so some of her songs are a bit more folksy, and those are a bit more hit or miss for me. But some of those I like, and then the blues songs I really, really love. She has a really rich contralto voice, and yeah, she's a great musician. And then finally, to finish out my non-classical music for this week, I listened to some Miles Davis. I have listened to Miles Davis in the past. I love his music. And this week I listened to his album Milestones and Round About Midnight. And they were great, so there will be some tracks from that. I know a lot of people don't like jazz. A lot of people dislike jazz quite vehemently. That's always kind of puzzled me. I don't really understand how anyone can dislike a genre of music. Like there are genres of music that I just don't care for, that I just don't listen to. They don't do anything for me, and that's fine. But I don't dislike them, and I always get the sense that with a genre of music that I'm not interested in, the problem isn't the genre. The problem is just that I haven't found a practitioner of the genre who speaks to me. And you know, I don't know. Some of these people who hate jazz, maybe they just need to find a jazz artist who speaks to them more than some of the ones that they have listened to. But anyway, there will be some Miles Davis in that playlist. If you're not a fan of jazz, you can skip it, or you can give it a try if you're not a fan of jazz, and maybe he'll turn you into a fan of jazz. Anyway, moving on now to classical. It's been a busy week in classical as well. And my classical selections start out with another recommendation of a video. And I can't quite remember the name of the channel who did the video, by the way. Anyway, so I can't remember the name of the channel, but I will leave a link to this video as well. I found this video analyzing the first prelude from J.S. Bach's With a Well-Tempered Clavier, and this analysis of this really short, 2.5 minute piece of music by Bach, and just how complex and fascinating it is, just blew my mind. I mean, Bach was genius, but it had the happy effect of sending me back to the Well-Tempered Clavier, which I did have listened to before, but decided to re-listen to, and I feel like I have developed a whole new appreciation for it. And it's very long, the whole thing. One recording I found by Glenn Gould was 3.5 hours. The recording that I listened to was done by Rosalind Turek, which was 5 hours. She plays a lot of the pieces more slowly, and yeah, I really liked Rosalind Turek's rendition a bit more than Glenn Gould's. With respect to Glenn Gould, of course, I love Glenn Gould, but I think Rosalind Turek plays the pieces a bit more slowly. Some of them a bit more gently, and there's something kind of melodic to the way that she plays them, and that's why I loved her renditions. Although the recording for her is a bit older, and so it doesn't sound, it's not as high quality sounding, but I really like her playing, so I'll leave some pieces from the Well-Tempered Clavier in there. It's one of the most important pieces of music ever written. J.S. Bach, in this long piece, sort of is credited with sort of creating key relations as we know it in modern sort of music theory in this piece. But the music itself is great. But if you're not a big fan of gentle piano music, then it might not be for you. Then I listened to some Maurice Ravel this week. I do love Ravel's Bolero, and I did re-listen to that, but I don't really need an excuse to listen to Bolero. It's one of my favorite pieces of music ever, certainly one of the best of the 20th century. I first came to Bolero through the ice dancing couple, Jane Torval and Christopher Dean, who are legends in the ice dancing world, who did this incredible free dance to Bolero. I've actually never loved free dance as much as a lot of other people do, but it is beautiful. And I'll try to remember to leave a link to a video of it if you're interested. But Bolero is such a great, great piece. But I also listened to Ravel's Gaspard de la Nuit, which is a piano piece, which I really liked. Very different from Bolero, but very interesting. And then his piano concerto in G major, especially the second, I believe the second slow movement is gorgeous. So yeah, and I definitely want to listen to Ravel's left-handed piano concerto. He wrote a piano concerto that is completely played on the left hand. And actually what's interesting about that concerto is that he wrote it for the brother of Ludwig Wittgenstein, the great 20th century philosopher. His brother, I can't remember his brother's first name, but obviously his last name was Wittgenstein. He was a great concert pianist, but he lost his right arm in the First World War. And so Ravel wrote this left-handed piano concerto for him so that he could, you know, perform. Yeah, so I'm interested in listening to that. If I do this week, then you'll hear next week. And then I re-listened as well to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Now, obviously we've all heard Beethoven's Fifth, that famous opening, of course, but I think what kills me about Beethoven's Fifth is that opening section has become such a kind of cliche, you know, it's so overused, so overplayed, played in these ridiculous contexts, you know, that it can be easy to kind of take Beethoven's Fifth for granted, you know, take for granted just how daring and incredible it was when it debuted and how incredible it still is, I think. It really is just a remarkable piece of music, and that is, I think, cheapened when we, you know, overplay it and, you know, use it as a cliche in whatever commercials we're doing or something. I think it's just a great piece of music from beginning to end. It's very short, and I will leave it in the playlist this week. I definitely, if you haven't actually listened to the whole of Beethoven's Fifth, if all you know is that opening theme, then definitely give the whole thing a listen. And then finally, to round out my older classical selections, I listened to a bunch of music from the Second Viennese School. And I'm actually still not sure what the first Viennese School was, but the Second Viennese School were these composers who wrote music in the 12-tone method developed by Arnold Schonberg. So it's largely atonal, although some of it is tonal. For example, this morning I listened to Anton Webern's Passacaglia, which is his first piece, and that actually is tonal, although its tonality sort of becomes extremely ambiguous, and there are parts of it that sound atonal, and Webern would go on to write extremely atonal music, serialist music actually, which is sort of the 12-tone method taken to something of an extreme. Anyway, I'm leaving Webern's Passacaglia in there. I'm also leaving Verklarte Nacht by Arnold Schonberg, which translates to Transfigured Night, which is also a tonal piece that Schonberg wrote relatively early in his career. It is gorgeous, it's haunting. Yeah, it's his most popular piece, and I think I can see why, because it's tonal and it's more sort of neo-romantic in a way. But I also really love Schonberg's Fourth String Quartet. Just that opening, the opening of it is one of my favorite pieces, one of my favorite openings ever. It's one of my favorite string quartets, definitely, so that is in the playlist. And then Pierrot Lunaire, of course, Schonberg's probably most famous, most important piece, maybe, in terms of the development of atonal music. I actually don't think that Pierrot Lunaire uses his 12-tone method. I think it's freely atonal, which is just atonal music that doesn't have a key center. So it's not written in the 12-tone method. It just doesn't have a key center, which is very difficult to do, actually. One of the reasons that Schonberg developed his 12-tone method is because the human ear tends to start to pick up on note clusters and to pick up on key relations without the composer even realizing it. And so it's actually very, very difficult to write music that is just atonal without any other system in place. And so that's why he developed the 12-tone method. But Pierrot Lunaire was a freely atonal piece outside of the 12-tone method. I think, don't quote me on that, but, and then finally, I'm leaving two pieces by Alban Berg, who I think might be my favorite of the Viennese school. He was the one of the three who remained the most connected with Romanticism. He wrote atonal music, not all in the 12-tone method, but a lot of it is atonal. But he was more open to allowing key relations to develop in his music, even in atonal pieces. For example, in his violin concerto, which I'm leaving in the playlist, which is beautiful. I think if you're not a fan of atonal or 12-tone music, then I think Berg's Violin Concerto would be a good place to go, because it is short, for one thing, and it has a really great emotional impact. It's a beautiful piece of music. And then there's his opera, Wozzeck, and his second opera, Lulu, which I haven't listened to yet. But Wozzeck, one of my favorite operas. I will leave one piece from it. And again, I think that if you think you don't like atonal music, I think that this one piece from Wozzeck, don't listen to all of Wozzeck, because it's, listen to a whole opera, it's daunting, but this one piece from Wozzeck might change your mind. And then finally, with the music, I have one more of a contemporary composer. His name is Olafur Arnalds, and he's an Icelandic composer. I seem to have a thing for musicians from Iceland. I don't really understand why, but like most of my favorite, or not most of my favorite, but I have a lot of favorite musicians who are from Iceland. I don't know what's in the water over there, but there are a lot of great musicians coming out of Iceland. So Olafur Arnalds writes kind of chill, ambient, relaxed, maybe sort of minimalist style music. It's it's sort of classical. I mean, he's not writing string quartets and concertos or something. He just writes like albums, but it's with a piano and strings and this sort of thing. So it reads to me sort of like a contemporary take on classical music, but it's really great, chill music. So I'll leave some of his music in the playlist this week. Now, moving on to books. I finished 3 books this week, which is a great reading week for me. 2 of them are extremely short, so it's not that big of an accomplishment, but one that I finished this week was a longer one, and one that you, of course, have not heard me shut up about. It is The Lives of the Great Composers, which I finally finished, and it's great. I mean, I probably don't really need to recommend it at this point to you. If you've been watching these Sunday Miscellany videos, you know that I have just been loving this book. It is so good. It's so well written, so easy to read, so approachable. Really it is a history of music through the lives and work of the great composers. Obviously this book has all the big names in it who are, staples of the repertoire. You have Mozart, Bach, Wagner, Schubert, Beethoven, Schonberg, so on and so forth. But there are also other composers that he discusses who were historically important, but whose music has kind of fallen out of the repertoire, and maybe justifiably so. And then he also talks about some composers who have fallen out of the repertoire, but maybe deserve some revival. For example, he talks about Hummel, who's this composer whose music is not played anymore, but who Schonberg believes deserves a revival. And so he talks not only about the big names, but also some more obscure stuff, which I really appreciated. I came out of this book with more recommendations than I really know what to do with. I will probably spend a lifetime listening to every piece of music that he names in this book, which is wonderful, of course. But I think that his discussions of the music will absolutely make readers want to read the music, because the way that he talks about it is so down to earth and approachable. He doesn't go into extensive analyses of the music. He's not doing some sort of line by line commentary on a piece. And he actually sort of derides this kind of commentary on music in his introduction. The other two books I finished this week are much shorter, and the first one is American Smooth by Rita Dove, which is her poetry collection from 2004, and it covers... It's a lot of poems about dance and music, especially there's poems about jazz, blues, classical, Latin music. There's poems about foxtrot dancing, rumba, other art forms. There are also poems that cover more sort of social issues. There's one about black soldiers fighting in World War I. There's one about a jazz band who were really popular in Europe during World War I. And also just other miscellaneous poems. But I found this to be one of the strongest slim volumes of poetry that I've ever read. Usually in these slim volumes, they tend to be really hit or miss. I find that collections like this, whether they're short stories or essays or anything like that, they tend to be really hit or miss. I think that comes with the territory, really. But this was one of the ones where I was consistently impressed, so it was really, really good. And I thought that just to give you a little bit of a taste of how good the work in this volume is, I would read you not even one poem, but just one stanza from one poem. So this is a section of a longer poem called 12 Chairs, and this section is called The Alternate, and it goes like this. And who are you? Nobody. What do you do? I am alive. But who'll vouch for you? Listen closely. You'll hear the wind. So I loved that. There was a lot of great stuff in this collection. I definitely recommend it. And then the heavy hitter of the week, despite its short length, is definitely Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis, which has an extremely self-explanatory title and is all about just how screwed up the American prison system is. Not just in the way that it treats prisoners, which is obviously horrific, and she actually also has a long passage about women's prisons and the way that women's prisons basically just have widespread state-sanctioned sexual assault going on in them, among many other things that happen in both women's and men's prisons, but also just how ensconced in racism the prison system is. If you need convincing that the prison system, the criminal justice system, is not all that interested in justice, but is more interested in controlling people who aren't white, then I would definitely recommend this book. She goes through the history of the prison system and the racism that has always sort of been there. She talks about how after the abolition of slavery, basically the prison system and criminal justice system were used as a way to, in a certain sense, re-enslave black people, because especially in the Jim Crow South, there were these black laws which made certain actions illegal for black people but not white people, which obviously put a disproportionate number of black people in prison. And then people who were in prison were legally able to be forced to do hard labor, helping build bridges and railroads and streets and so on and so forth. So basically, the prison system early on was used as a way of sort of re-enslaving people. And even though that system is ostensibly not in place anymore, prison labor is still used today by many corporations. And the prison system has become such a profitable industry. She talks about the prison industrial complex and how so many corporations have come to depend on the prison system. Not always for labor, but just think of the amount of food you need to run a prison, the medical care you need to run a prison, and so on and so forth. And corporations benefit off of that. And then, of course, there's the development of private prisons, which just benefit explicitly from the number of prisoners in their prisons, because they're paid by the government by the number of prisoners they have. And she discusses women in prison and how women's prisons should not be seen as a marginal issue, that, basically women's prisons and the way that women are treated by the criminal justice system is basically a huge practice in state-sanctioned sexual assault. And I think, honestly, this book deserves an entire video, so I may try to do that. If I feel like I can really do this book justice, I will try to do a video about it. But I just highly recommend it. If you are not convinced that the prison system should be abolished, not just, prison reform. She also discusses, quote-unquote, prison reform and how problematic that is. Prisons should be abolished. If you are not convinced of that, then I would definitely recommend this book. But yeah, and on a stylistic level, I will also just say that this book is incredibly well organized. She will, in the space of like 2 paragraphs, lay out an argument, provide evidence, and just make me see something in a whole new light. And just stylistically and organizationally, I think that that's brilliant. So it's a great book, but a hard read. So, but I do recommend it. And this is where I usually go through the books that I am going to be reading throughout the week. It is Black History Month, and I have decided to read as many books as possible by Black authors this month. I, in my past reading, have not been great about reading diversely and all that sort of thing. I think that reading diversely, reading books by authors from a variety of backgrounds should always come from a place of, you know, of genuine exploration and interest in the books, and not from a place of being virtuous. You know, I don't think you should ever read a book just because the author is, you know, XYZ demographically, because I think that's frankly insulting to the author. You know, think of going up to an author and saying, yeah, I read your book because you're Latino, or you're Native American, or you're Black. I think that that author would not be very happy with you. But I think what reading diversely is about is doing the work of looking for books by people from a variety of backgrounds that genuinely interest you, that speak to your tastes and your interests. And I have not always done a great job of doing that. And this year I want to change that. And obviously there's a big discussion that comes up around Black History Month where, you know, people will post their TBRs and say, I'm reading XYZ for Black History Month, and then a whole other crop of people will say, well, you should be reading books by Black authors throughout the year. It shouldn't be like a Black History Month thing. And I agree with those second people that you should, that if you are serious about it, you should be reading them all year. And again, I'd say that as someone who does not do a good job of doing that. But I think that something like reading a large stack of books like by Black authors in Black History Month can be a great way to sort of get you a jump start on getting to a place where you are doing that, you know, because you read all these books, you discover these new authors, perhaps discover some authors through those other authors. For example, Angela Davis in Our Prison's Obsolete recommended all sorts of books, and so that will lead me to those books. And it's a way to sort of give your reading of Black authors a shot in the arm, basically. That's what I think is good about doing something like reading Black authors for Black History Month. So I'm focusing a lot on books by Black authors, not exclusively, but this week I have 3 books that I have my eyes on, and 2 other things that I will be poking into as well. So the first one, which I started this morning, is Life on Mars by Tracy K. Smith, who, in this volume, won the Pulitzer Prize, and Tracy K. Smith is a former Poet Laureate of the United States. I'm only 10 pages in and I'm already loving this, so I'm really excited to get more into that. Then I think also I will read this week Discourse on Colonialism by Aimé Césaire, which is all about colonialism. And then another book, which Angela Davis does discuss in Our Prison's Obsolete, is Assata, an autobiography by Assata Shakur. And I believe that Helene from Books by Lanes just did a video about this book, like literally just posted this morning, which is very serendipitous because I was just getting ready to start reading this. But yeah, I want to read this. I have wanted to read it for a long time, and I've heard good things from obviously Brianna, now Helene, and also Sharon Goforth loves this book. But I think it'll be a really interesting, difficult read, but yeah. And then I'm also going to be reading this week from the Gospel of Luke in my King James Bible. I'm continuing with my reading of the New Testament with that, and I will have a video on that. And then finally, I did mention last week that I wanted to read more from this, to listen to the music and read from this. I did do some of it this week. I did it with Beethoven's Fifth, and that was really great. I did it with one other piece that I didn't mention today. But yeah, I will continue to read through this week. And then lastly, I have movies to talk about. So I watched 4 movies this week, which is a pretty good week for me. So last Sunday, just after I posted my last Sunday Miscellany, I watched Hasard, Balthazar, directed by Robert Bresson. Last week I watched A Man Escaped, directed by Robert Bresson, and loved that. And Hasard, Balthazar was just amazing. It was so powerful, really has an incredibly powerful emotional impact, especially at its ending. You know, for much of the movie, I was thinking that this was going to be a maybe like 8 to 9 out of 10, and then in the last like 10 minutes, it became a 10 out of 10, just on the basis of its emotional impact on me. You know, sometimes I will judge something based on the emotional impact that it had, and this is one of those cases. It's just such a beautiful film, you know. And yeah, I cannot wait to explore more of Bresson's filmography, because just with these 2 films, I think he's already moved into my maybe, I don't know about top 10, but maybe top 15, top 20 directors. This film is just so good. Don't watch it lightly. If you're gonna watch it, be prepared for a huge impact. It's also about a donkey, the life of a donkey who sort of passes from owner to owner and is sometimes treated well, sometimes he's abused. So if that sort of thing is not your thing, then you might want to avoid it, but it is so great. I love the minimal soundtrack. I love Bresson's sort of minimalist style. It's so good. And then I watched a new release. This is Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which is directed by George Wolfe, and which is about the blues singer Ma Rainey, and it focuses on a single recording session that she attends with her band at a recording studio that's owned by white people. It was really good. It's actually based on a play by August Wilson of the same name, and you could really tell that it was based on a play because it was extremely talky. There's a lot of dialogue, and there are like monologues built into it. And there are a couple of moments where I think the fact that it's based on a play was actually to its detriment. There are a couple of moments I think that would work really well on the stage, but in a movie they feel a little forced, a little melodramatic. And you could also tell that it was a play because of just how talky it was. Like you had one like 20-minute scene that was just, 4 men in a room talking about whatever. And it was really good, really great dialogue, really engaging. There's character development built into that. There are the themes of sort of racism built into that. You learn about the characters. It's really good, really well acted. What everyone has said about this is the acting of Viola Davis and Chadwick Boseman in his final role, sadly. And I just have to echo the praise for those two in particular. They are amazing, both of them, especially I think Chadwick Boseman is outstanding. But the whole cast I think was good. I don't think there was any bad acting in the movie, which is great. I think what I think was great about it, so it obviously explores the racial dynamics of this recording section, and there are a lot of themes of racism. And what I think was great about it is that it so much of the conversation around racism has to do with how white people engage in racism, and there's not as much conversation about how black people respond to it or are affected by it. And this movie was pretty much entirely about that, about how black people respond to racism and deal with it and how it affects them. And I really appreciated that, and so this movie has a lot going for it. I didn't think it was perfect. Like I said, there's some moments that didn't quite work, but it's really good. I do recommend it. If you like movies about musicians, then you would like this. One thing that I might say about it is that I wish there had been more singing. There was actually very little actual singing from Ma Rainey, which is odd in a movie with Ma Rainey in the title. But anyway, a good movie. I can recommend it. It's on Netflix, so go seek it out. And then another Netflix film that I watched was The Trial of the Chicago 7, which is written and directed by Aaron Sorkin, which made me very excited because Aaron Sorkin wrote the screenplay for The Social Network, which is one of my favorite movies ever. And he's also well known as a great screenwriter. I think this is his second film that he's directing. And so this is about the trial of the Chicago 7 in 1968. And it had the 2020 protests like plastered all over it, which I thought was crazy because I'm pretty sure this movie was like written and probably shot well before the 2020 protests, Black Lives Matter protests were even happening, and yet it still had those protests, I felt like just plastered all over it. And so that was pretty interesting, but it was great. It was really fast-paced dialogue, really great dialogue. Again, Aaron Sorkin, great writer. It's also very funny, which I always really appreciate when serious movies also have a lot of humor. I love that. There's a huge, great cast. I feel like actually the standout for me is Frank Langella Jr. as the judge, Julius Hoffman, the sort of corrupt judge in this case, who shows very clearly his bias right from the start. I thought he just played such a good, sly, subtle asshole. He was so good, I thought. But Michael Keaton is in it, Joseph Gordon-Levitt is in it, Sacha Baron Cohen, all sorts of great actors. So it was good. I did find that it maybe didn't have the impact on me that the director wanted it to, but that's okay. It was still excellent. I do have a feeling that this movie will end up being somewhat overpraised, just because of its relevance, quote unquote. That word is so overused, but you know, I was seeing its relevance all over, and I have a feeling that it might end up being overpraised for that reason. And I say that knowing that it is a great movie. You know, I really would love if Frank Langella Jr. was nominated for an Oscar. I would love it if it were nominated for Best Screenplay. I think it would deserve that nomination, absolutely. The directing is a little bit indifferent. It's not bad, but it's a little bit indifferent. But I just have this feeling that this movie will get all sorts of nominations across the board where, and people will praise it as like a masterpiece, when in reality it's, you know, a good movie, but not a masterpiece quite. But maybe I'm wrong. That's not to say that I don't recommend it. I do recommend it. If it sounds like a subject you're interested in, it's a really entertaining film. And then the last film that I have to talk about is a classic. This is The Searchers, directed by John Ford. One of the greatest westerns ever made, according to many people, the greatest western. I would probably disagree with those people and say that I prefer Once Upon a Time in the West to the great Sergio Leone masterpiece with the wonderful Ennio Morricone score, but I'm biased in favor of Sergio Leone. The Searchers is wonderful. This is actually my second time watching it, and the first time that I watched The Searchers, I enjoyed it thoroughly. I liked it a lot, but I didn't think too much about it. But this time watching it, it just sort of blew my mind, you know, because I knew that it was one of the most influential films ever made, but I watched it this time and I could just see plastered all over it all of the influence that it's had, all of the shots in it, all of the techniques in it that have become sort of just commonplace. You know, we can sort of take them for granted, you know? They've almost become cliches. Like, for example, there's the scene where John Wayne's character and another character come and find that the home of his family has been burned down and they've been killed, and the smoke rising from the ruins, and you know, that made me think of the scene from Star Wars: A New Hope, where Luke comes and finds his aunt and uncle have been killed and the house has been burned. It's almost like frame for frame, like the same thing. And I just saw shots like that I related to other shots in movies I've liked. Just techniques, you know, various techniques that he uses that have become so commonplace. It just blew my mind on that level, but I feel like it still manages to seem new and fresh and gorgeous. And, you know, the cinematography, it was shot in Monument Valley, in Arizona, on the Arizona-Utah border, in the Navajo Nation. The cinematography of that area is absolutely beautiful. There's a lot of shots from doorways, so you'll see, you know, there'll be the frame of the camera, and then there'll be a frame with a door that's also sort of a frame within a frame. And that made me think of In the Mood for Love, the Wong Kar-wai film, where that technique is used all over that movie. And obviously John Ford used it a lot in this movie. Obviously the last shot in the movie with John Wayne's character sort of walking out into the distance is very famous, but it's used throughout. And he uses it throughout his filmography, from what I understand. And it's just fabulously entertaining, you know. I think John Ford has a great way with building suspense, you know, even though I, of course, knew how this movie ended, he had a great way of building your anticipation for something. It's so good. And it's just wonderful to re-watch a movie and just have it open up to you, you know, and just realize that the first time you watched it, you may have liked it, but you didn't quite see everything that was so brilliant about it. And it may just be that when I watched it the first time, I hadn't watched enough other movies to, you know, see its influence and how great it is, and now I can sort of see that. But it's so good, and it makes me actually want to go on kind of a John Ford binge. There is one aspect of The Searchers that is highly problematic, which is its portrayal of Native Americans. There's a lot of Comanche characters do appear in this film, and a Comanche chief named Scar is the main antagonist, who kidnaps John Wayne's character's niece, I believe, and the searchers are searching for the niece to save her from the Native Americans. And the portrayals of Native Americans are extremely stereotyped, you know? You have this one scene where this band of Comanche all line up and are doing this Comanche death song, supposedly. And, you know, it's just slathered in stereotypes, right? And there are other instances of it as well. And it's not necessarily that the portrayal is 100% inaccurate. You know, I've read a book about the Comanche, and from what I understand, this portrayal is not entirely inaccurate, but the movie itself doesn't do anything to challenge the idea that Native Americans are just kind of, you know, these sort of half-human savages in a way. And that makes it problematic, in addition to its stereotyped portrayals. But I will say that on my second viewing, I did find that the racial dynamics in the movie were more complicated than I originally thought, you know, because Scar himself is actually given a motivation for what he does. You know, he has lost children, he has lost 2 sons to white people. You know, they've been murdered by white people, and so he has an actual motivation for what he does. He's not just, you know, a violent, you know, quote-unquote savage seeking, you know, plunder or something. He has a motivation, so he is humanized in that slight way. And there is a moment where John Wayne's character makes a comment about one of the other main characters, whose name I of course can't remember, but the other character, who's not John Wayne's character, is like an 8th Cherokee, and John Wayne makes these racist comments about him, and that is challenged to a degree. And John Wayne, and there are other aspects in which I think John Wayne's character is extremely racist, and there are ways in which he is challenged. And so the racial dynamics, I think, are more complicated, and I don't feel like I can really do them entirely justice here. I feel like, honestly, I can make a whole video about The Searchers. So anyway, that's my Sunday Miscellany. I hope you all are having a good weekend, and I hope you all have a good week. If you have any thoughts about any of this, let me know, and I will talk to you later. Bye.